Lesson I'd like to teach you today comes from Swimming Creatures of the 5th Day. This is a class that I taught to a 2nd through 4th grade classroom in a homeschool co-op, and it was a wonderful class. We met once a week for 1 hour, and I pulled in all sorts of marine creatures for dissection that we would look at. We'd explore living creatures. We did a lot of science experiments on concepts in this text. And this was a wonderful book. It's by Apologia because it explores creation and presents it to students from a Christian worldview. The unit that I was going to do today is Unit 6 on fish, and this is one that I taught a lesson on bony fish. And the way we did that is I had a basket of items for the students to place on the bulletin board. And we had been talking about different terms, benthic, sessile, and nectonic types of fish. And it was how they move, is how they were classified. And so I began this class by giving them each a picture of a different sea creature. And they would review and tell me how the creature moved in which one of those 3 categories. And we had a bulletin board across the back wall that would be placed in. I then began by introducing osteichthyes, or bony fish. And I would put that term on the board. I think that young students, even my 2nd graders, loved learning some of those big words and explaining to them how that was a bony fish. And what does a bony fish mean? A bony fish is one that has a backbone. And we would make a KWL chart of what they know about bony fish. And I would ask them, what do you know about bony fish? What do you know about a fish that has bones? What are your experiments with fishes? And we'd write that down. Maybe they'd gone out and they'd seen a fish at the aquarium. Or they had gone fishing and caught fish, and maybe Dad had filleted it in front of them afterwards, and they'd seen the bones inside. Or perhaps they'd had experience with having a fish tank at home. So we'd write down what they know. And I'd say, what kind of questions do you guys have today about fish? What things would you like to know? And that would go in the want to know. And then we would leave the L for later for what we had learned that day. And then we went on to see a short video clip about bony fish in the unit. And then I had 3 different areas of learning for the students. I gave them from this book, Swimming Creatures of the 5th Day, I had a that I handed out to the students about labeling of fish. And we learned what the pectoral fin was, the dorsal fin, the caudal fin, the pelvic fin, and the anal fin. And we'd label the different parts. And we talk about the different parts of the fish. I also gave them a page where they would write down some of the interesting things that we learned during the lesson about fish. Throughout the class, I had a lot of different animal models of the creature that we would study today. So the kids would get excited. They'd come into the room, they'd see the bright, colorful, different animal creatures that we were learning that day. And every day that they came in, we would make a model of some sort, an art project. And we had a aquatic box, like an aquarium, where they would keep their art projects and little models they made of the different fish throughout the entire year that we studied this. And they were kept in the classroom. So we worked on labeling the fish, and we talked about bony fish. We watched a lesson on bony fish, and then we had our practice and application section. We began by taking a fish that I had gotten from my dissecting kit, and it was just like a cod that had all of its, it had been preserved. And I showed them, first of all, from a YouTube video, how to make a fish print. And this is something that's called the Japanese fishermen do to save their catch. And it's called a Gayatake fish print. And I took the fish, I explained how we were actually going to paint it, and I would do it and model in front of them. Then we took a thin piece of tissue paper, placed it over the fish, and lifted it up. And this is the Japanese fishermen's way of both eating the fish and saving their catch. Then they would place that on the wall. So the students in one unit would make, in one group, would get to make this Gayatake fish print. While that group was working, in another group, I had a paper where they would sit down and they were to design their own fish. They would then show me that they knew the fish parts. It was sort of the assessment section, because they would draw their own fish and I would look. Did they remember to add fins? We'd talk about, where would this fish live? What did it eat? What environment did it live in? What color was it? They would design their own fish, name it, talk about its habitat, and that was another group that we would rotate through. And then the last one we had clay that day, and we would make a clay model for the ocean diorama that the students had. And so the children rotated through all three of those areas. If they got done early, I only have one today, unfortunately. I didn't have time to go to the library and pick all the books, but I will have it in the lesson plan I send you. I always had interesting books for the students when they got done, if they got done with the rotation early, so that they could read a book about what we were learning that day, or at least look through the pictures, some supplemental books. At the end of the lesson, we came back, we'd clean up, everybody would have their things, and I'd have the students come and sit down, and they'd show me their picture and explain what their fish's name was, and tell me about their design for the fish and where it lived, and we'd do that briefly in review. And then we'd go back to that section on the board. We had the know, what we want to know, and then we talk about, what did you learn today? Can anybody tell me what they've learned about boating fish today? And then we'd go through where what they had learned, how it moves, what the lateral line was, and the different structures that a fish needs to live and move. A lot of times with this particular unit, and this was a wonderful class, we would also have that fish that I had made the art project with. The next time we would have had open and dissect, and we would have showed them the swim bladder, we would have showed them the different features within the fish. And these kids loved this particular class, and I also loved it because we were also always talking about God's creation and how each of these wonderful creatures that we looked at throughout the year. We looked at sea stars, and we would dissect, and we pulled the stomach out through the bottom section, and we talked about how their stomach comes out to digest food, and it was really a fascinating unit. I learned, the kids learned. I took my son's high school marine biology textbook, and I would be reading it each time before I got to that unit because I wasn't an expert in marine biology, and enjoyed gathering the materials and putting everything together for the students. So this is an example of one lesson that I taught. It's a lot harder to teach this lesson without having students here to talk to me and then going back and forth. I would love to come out and teach a lesson in front of you in an actual classroom setting. That is so much easier. And you see, I don't have a bulletin board in my own home. I don't have a blackboard or whiteboard. I don't have any of those things that I would usually use to teach. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about this unit that I taught about God's creatures from the and creation with Zoology 2, Swimming Creatures of the Fifth Day. If you haven't used this book in your school, this is a wonderful series of texts to teach about God's creation. Thank you.